The coffee mug slipped from Detective Sarah Martinez's fingers, ceramic shattering against the precinct floor as she stared at the DNA match results glowing on her computer screen. 12 years. 12 years of sleepless nights, of following dead-end leads, of watching a family's hope slowly erode like snow melting in the Colorado sun. And now, in the harsh fluorescent light of a Tuesday morning in March 2023, the impossible had happened. The name on the screen made her stomach lurch. Olivia Smith, 34, elementary school teacher, Lakewood, Colorado. Not a drifter, not a career criminal, not some shadowy figure from the margins of society. A teacher. Someone who spent her days shaping young minds, who probably had hand-drawn cards from her students taped to her classroom walls, who baked cookies for faculty meetings and stayed late to help struggling readers, someone the community trusted with their most precious gifts. Sarah's partner, Detective Mike Chen, looked up from his own desk, concern creasing his weathered face. "What is it? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Worse," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible above the hum of the precinct's aging air conditioning system. "I think we just found our killer." The case had haunted the town of Cedar Ridge, Colorado, since that bitter February night in 2011 when 16-year-old Emma Rodriguez never came home from her shift at the local movie theater. Emma, with her infectious laugh and dreams of studying marine biology, had simply vanished into the thin mountain air. Her car was found 3 days later, abandoned on a remote Forest Service road, keys still in the ignition, her purse untouched on the passenger seat. But Emma was gone. The search had mobilized the entire community. Hundreds of volunteers had combed through snow-laden forests, their breath visible in crystalline puffs, as they called Emma's name until their voices grew hoarse. Search dogs had followed scent trails that led nowhere. Helicopters had circled overhead like mechanical vultures, their rotors beating against the mountain silence. Emma's body was discovered 6 weeks later by a hiker, partially buried under a pile of rocks and dead leaves in a ravine 15 miles from town. The cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head. There were signs of a struggle, defensive wounds on her hands and arms that spoke of a young woman who had fought desperately for her life. But the scene yielded frustratingly little evidence. No fingerprints, no DNA under her fingernails, no witnesses who remembered seeing anything unusual. The case had consumed Sarah from the beginning. Fresh out of detective training, she had thrown herself into the investigation with the fervor of someone who believed that justice was not just an ideal, but an achievable goal. She had interviewed everyone who knew Emma, mapped out timelines with obsessive precision, and followed every lead no matter how insignificant it seemed. She had held Emma's mother Rosa as the woman sobbed into her shoulder at the funeral, promising through her own tears that she would never stop looking for answers. But months turned to years, and the leads dried up like autumn leaves. The case grew cold, filed away in manila folders that gathered dust on forgotten shelves. The community's attention moved on to other tragedies, other concerns. Rosa Rodriguez aged 10 years in 2, her dark hair streaked with premature silver, her eyes holding a hollow quality that Sarah recognized in the families of unsolved cases, the look of people suspended between hope and despair. Now, staring at Olivia Smith's photograph on her screen, a professional headshot that showed a woman with kind eyes and a genuine smile, the kind of teacher who probably remembered every student's birthday, Sarah felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders like a lead blanket. Mike had risen from his desk and was reading over her shoulder, his coffee breath warm against her ear. "Jesus Christ, Sarah, are you sure about this? Olivia Smith? I know her. My daughter had her for 3rd grade 2 years ago. She's—" He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "She's what, Mike? She's nice? She's normal? So was Ted Bundy to most people who knew him. Sarah's voice was sharper than she intended, but the shock was giving way to a familiar anger. Anger at how evil could hide behind such ordinary masks. The DNA match was solid. A breakthrough in forensic technology had allowed them to reprocess evidence from Emma's clothing, extracting a partial profile that had been impossible to detect with the methods available in 2011. When they ran it through the updated database 3 days ago, expecting another dead end, Olivia Smith's profile had lit up like a neon sign. Olivia had been in the system because of a DUI arrest in 2019, a routine traffic stop that had led to a night in jail and a mandatory DNA sample. According to the arrest report, she had been cooperative, apologetic even, explaining that she was going through a difficult divorce and had made a terrible mistake. The kind of human error that people could understand and forgive. But now that small mistake had become the thread that would unravel everything. Sarah pulled up Olivia's background file, her fingers trembling slightly as she scrolled through the details of a life that seemed aggressively normal. Born in Denver in 1989, the youngest of 3 children. Parents still married, living in the same suburban ranch house where Olivia had grown up. Bachelor's degree in elementary education from the University of Colorado, followed by 8 years of teaching at various schools around the Denver metro area before settling at Oakwood Elementary in Lakewood. The employment records painted a picture of a dedicated educator, glowing performance reviews, parent testimonials praising her patience and creativity, volunteer work with literacy programs. She had even been nominated for Teacher of the Year in 2021, though she hadn't won. "This doesn't make sense," Mike muttered, rubbing his temples. "I mean, look at this woman. She's got no criminal history except that DUI, no red flags anywhere. How does someone like this beat a teenager to death?" It was the question that would haunt Sarah for months to come. In her 12 years as a detective, she had learned that evil rarely announced itself with obvious signs. The most dangerous predators were often the ones who blended seamlessly into society, who earned trust through years of careful performance before revealing their true nature in moments of terrible darkness. She thought about Emma Rodriguez, about the dreams that died with her in that cold ravine. Emma had wanted to study the ocean, to unlock the mysteries of marine ecosystems. She had been saving money from her part-time job at the theater, planning to attend Colorado State University in the fall. Her bedroom, which Rosa had kept exactly as Emma had left it, was filled with posters of dolphins and sea turtles, with books about coral reefs and deep-sea exploration. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So, if you're enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. And somewhere in the timeline between Emma leaving work that February night and her body being discovered 6 weeks later, her path had crossed with Olivia Smith's in a way that cost Emma everything and hidden the truth for over a decade. The precinct phone rang, jarring Sarah from her thoughts. The caller ID showed the district attorney's office. Word was already spreading through the system like wildfire. Within hours, there would be a warrant. Within days, there would be an arrest that would shatter Cedar Ridge's sense of safety and normalcy. Sarah looked at Olivia Smith's photo one more time, trying to reconcile the smiling face with the brutal crime. Somewhere behind those kind eyes was a person capable of taking a young life and living with that secret for 12 years. Somewhere in that ordinary exterior was someone who looked Emma's mother in the eye at community meetings and said nothing while Rosa begged for information about her daughter's killer. The coffee stain on the floor had already begun to set, a dark brown mark that would be permanent if not cleaned soon. Sarah grabbed some paper towels from the break room, kneeling to scrub at the stain while her mind raced through the implications of what they had discovered. Some stains, she knew, could never be completely removed. Some marks on a community's soul would remain forever, a reminder of the darkness that could hide behind the most innocent faces. As she worked, she wondered what Olivia Smith was doing at that very moment. Was she teaching a math lesson to a classroom full of 8-year-olds? Was she helping a struggling student sound out words? Was she thinking about Emma Rodriguez at all? Or had she managed to bury that February night so deeply that it rarely surfaced in her conscious thoughts? The answers to those questions would come soon enough. But first, Sarah had a phone call to make, one that would change everything for everyone involved. She picked up her phone and dialed Rosa Rodriguez's number from memory. After 12 years, it was burned into her mind like a prayer. Rosa Rodriguez answered on the second ring, her voice carrying the same cautious hope that Sarah had heard every time they spoke over the past 12 years. "Detective Martinez, do you have news?" Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the moment settle around her like mountain air. "Rosa, I need you to sit down. We found him. We found Emma's killer." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for what felt like an eternity. Sarah could hear Rosa's breathing, quick and shallow, and the distant sound of a television in the background, probably one of those morning talk shows that Rosa watched to fill the empty hours. "Who?" Rosa's voice was barely a whisper. "A woman named Olivia Smith. She's a teacher in Lakewood. Rosa, I need you to tell you that this is going to be difficult. The arrest will be public, and there's going to be media attention. Are you ready for that?" Another pause. Then Rosa began to cry, not the desperate sobs Sarah had witnessed so many times over the years, but quiet tears that spoke of relief and grief and exhaustion all tangled together. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for never giving up on my Emma." After the call ended, Sarah sat in her car outside the precinct, her hands gripping the steering wheel as she tried to process the magnitude of what was about to unfold. In a few hours, she would be part of a team serving an arrest warrant to a woman whose biggest public scandal had been a DUI 4 years ago. By evening, Olivia Smith's face would be on every news channel in Colorado, her name forever linked to one of the state's most tragic cold cases. But first, Sarah needed to understand who they were dealing with. The drive to Oakwood Elementary took 45 minutes through Denver's sprawling suburbs, past strip malls and housing developments that all seemed to blur together in their studied normalcy. Sarah had made this drive countless times over the years, chasing leads that always seemed to evaporate like morning frost. Today felt different. Today she was hunting a killer who had been hiding in plain sight. Oakwood Elementary was a single-story brick building surrounded by carefully maintained playgrounds and a garden where students learned about plant life cycles. Children's artwork decorated the hallway windows, colorful handprint turkeys and crayon drawings of families that would soon be looking at their teacher in a very different light. Sarah parked across the street and watched through her binoculars as recess began. Teachers emerged from the building like shepherds guiding groups of children towards swings and monkey bars. And there, supervising a group of third graders near the basketball court, was Olivia Smith. She was smaller than Sarah had expected, maybe 5'4", with shoulder-length brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She wore dark jeans and a purple sweater, clothes that suggested someone who spent her days kneeling to a child's eye level and didn't worry about grass stands. As Sarah watched, a little girl with pigtails ran up to Olivia, apparently upset about something. Olivia knelt down immediately, her hands gentle on the child's shoulders as she listened with complete attention. It was a scene of such ordinary kindness that Sarah felt a moment of vertigo, as if she were watching two different people occupying the same body. How could those same hands that were now wiping away a child's tears have once struck Emma Rodriguez with enough force to crush her skull? Sarah's radio crackled with Mike's voice. "Sarah, we've got the warrant signed. DA wants us to move on this today before word leaks out. Can you confirm subject is on location?" "Confirmed," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the churning in her stomach. "Olivia Smith is currently supervising recess at Oakwood Elementary. I count approximately 60 children in the immediate area." "Jesus, okay. We'll coordinate with school administration. Principal's name is Janet Morrison. I've got her number. We'll need to do this carefully, Sarah. Last thing we need is traumatized kids witnessing their teacher getting arrested." Sarah understood. The arrest would be devastating enough for the students without adding the trauma of seeing it happen. These children trusted Olivia Smith. She was probably the adult they ran to when they skinned their knees, the one who celebrated their small victories and helped them through their fears. In a few hours, their safe world would be shattered by the revelation that someone they loved had taken another person's life. As she continued watching, Sarah noticed details that might have meant nothing to a casual observer, but spoke volumes to someone trained to read human behavior. Olivia never let her guard down completely, even in this playground setting. Her eyes constantly scanned the area, alert to potential problems. When a group of older boys from another class began playing too roughly near the younger children, she intervened immediately, redirecting them with a firm but friendly authority that suggested someone accustomed to maintaining control. But there was something else, something harder to define, a quality of watchfulness that went beyond normal teacher vigilance. Sarah had seen it before in suspects who had learned to live with secrets, a hyper-awareness of their surroundings that came from always being ready to deflect questions or redirect attention. The bell rang, signaling the end of recess, and Olivia began gathering her students. Sarah watched her count heads twice, ensuring that every child was accounted for before heading toward the building. It was the behavior of someone who took responsibility seriously, who understood that other people depended on her, which made what she had done to Emma Rodriguez even more incomprehensible. Sarah's phone rang. Principal Morrison had been briefed and was cooperating fully. Olivia Smith would be called to the main office at 2:30 p.m., ostensibly for a routine meeting about standardized test schedules. Her students would be covered by a substitute teacher who was already being briefed on the afternoon lesson plans. The arrest would happen away from the children, in the administrative wing, where the sound wouldn't carry to the classrooms. The hours until 2:30 crawled by with agonizing slowness. Sarah positioned herself in the school parking lot, watching the building and thinking about all the ways this could go wrong. Would Olivia resist arrest? Would she confess immediately, overwhelmed by 12 years of carrying this secret? Would she maintain her innocence, forcing them to build their case piece by piece in the harsh glare of public scrutiny? At exactly 2:25, Sarah saw Olivia Smith walking across the main hallway toward the office, her steps measured and confident. She was carrying a coffee mug that read, "World's Okayest Teacher," the kind of self-deprecating humor that made her popular with both students and parents. In 5 minutes, that coffee mug would be evidence in a murder case. Sarah's phone rang again. Mike and 2 other detectives were positioned at the school's rear entrance. A patrol unit was stationed at the front, and another team was watching the parking lot. It was more than enough manpower to arrest one elementary school teacher, but they couldn't take any chances, not with this much at stake. At 2:30 exactly, Sarah entered the building through the main entrance. The hallways smelled like disinfectant and childhood, that distinctive mixture of crayon wax, construction paper, and apple juice that seemed to permeate every elementary school in America. She could hear the muffled sounds of learning, a teacher reading aloud, children reciting multiplication tables, or someone practicing the recorder with more enthusiasm than skill. Principal Morrison met her at the door, her face pale but determined. "She's in the conference room," she whispered. "I told her we needed to discuss her lesson plans for the state testing period. She seems completely normal, Detective. Are you absolutely certain about this?" Sarah nodded grimly. DNA didn't lie. Whatever Olivia Smith seemed to be for the past 12 years, whatever good she had done in these hallways, it couldn't erase what she had done to Emma Rodriguez in February 2011. Through the conference room window, Sarah could see Olivia sitting at the table, looking through a folder of papers. She appeared relaxed, perhaps even a little bored by what she assumed was another administrative meeting. She had no idea that her carefully constructed life was about to collapse like a house of cards. Sarah took a deep breath and opened the door.
"Miss Smith, I'm Detective Sarah Martinez with the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. I need to speak with you about Emma Rodriguez." The change in Olivia's expression was subtle but unmistakable. The polite attention she had shown for what she thought was a meeting about test schedules shifted to something much more guarded. Her hands, which had been casually turning pages in the folder, went still. "I'm sorry," Olivia said carefully, "but I don't know anyone by that name." It was a lie, and they both knew it. Emma Rodriguez's disappearance and murder had been front-page news for months. Every person in Colorado had seen Emma's picture, had followed the search efforts, had grieved when her body was found. Claiming not to know the name was like claiming not to know who the president was. But Sarah had expected this. 12 years was a long time to practice denial. Emma Rodriguez was 16 years old when she was murdered in February 2011, Sarah said, settling into the chair across from Olivia. "We've been investigating her case for 12 years, and today we finally have some answers." Olivia's face remained carefully neutral, but Sarah noticed that she had begun tapping her index finger against the table, a small, rhythmic motion that suggested anxiety despite her outward composure. "I'm not sure how I can help you," Olivia said. "That was a long time ago, and I didn't know the girl. The thing is, Miss Smith, we have physical evidence that connects you to Emma Rodriguez's murder. DNA evidence, and I'm afraid I'm going to have to place you under arrest." For a moment, time seemed frozen. Olivia stared at Sarah with an expression that might have been confusion or might have been the look of someone whose worst nightmare was finally coming true. Then slowly, she began to smile. It wasn't a pleasant smile. It was the smile of someone who had been playing a game for 12 years and was finally being forced to show their cards. "Well," she said quietly, "I wondered when this day would come." The Miranda rights echoed strangely in the small conference room, each word carrying weight that seemed to press against the walls lined with cheerful educational posters. Olivia Smith listened to the familiar phrases with an eerie calm, her hands folded in her lap like a student waiting for class to begin. When Sarah finished reading, Olivia nodded once. "I understand my rights," she said, in the same tone she might use to confirm a parent-teacher conference appointment. The booking process at the Jefferson County Detention Center was surreal in its mundane efficiency. Fingerprints, phonographs, personal effects cataloged and sealed in manila envelopes. Olivia's teacher ID badge went into evidence bag 247, her world's okayest teacher coffee mug into 248. The small gold cross she wore around her neck, a gift from her students last Christmas, was carefully removed and tagged as 249. Throughout it all, Olivia remained composed, answering procedural questions with polite courtesy while revealing nothing about the night Emma Rodriguez died. She might have been filling out paperwork for a field trip rather than being processed for first-degree murder. News of the arrest broke at 6:47 p.m. when a local reporter spotted the booking entry in the county database. By 7 p.m., Olivia Smith's name was trending on social media. By 8 p.m., news vans were parked outside Oakwood Elementary, their satellite dishes reaching toward the darkening sky like mechanical prayers. Sarah watched the coverage from the precinct break room, her coffee growing cold as she scrolled through the online reactions. The comment sections were a study of cognitive dissonance, former students and parents struggling to reconcile their memories of a beloved teacher with the woman now sitting in a jail cell. "Miss Smith changed my daughter's life," read one Facebook comment. "She stayed after school every day for 2 months to help her with reading. This can't be true. My son still talks about the science experiments he did with his class. She made learning fun. There has to be a mistake." But there were other voices too, darker threads that suggested some people had sensed something off about Olivia Smith. A few former colleagues mentioned that she had always been a little too controlled, hard to really get to know. One anonymous post claimed that she had been creepy around teenagers when she chaperoned high school events, though the details were vague and might have been nothing more than hindsight bias.
Mike appeared in the doorway, his face grim. "We've got a problem, Sarah. Channel 9 just ran a segment with 3 of Smith's former students, all of them crying, all of them saying she was the best teacher they ever had. The defense attorney is going to use every single one of those testimonials." Sarah nodded wearily. She had seen this before. the community rallying around a suspect who seemed too normal, too integrated into society to be capable of murder. It would make the prosecution's job infinitely harder, especially given the 12-year gap between the crime and the arrest. "What do we know about her background?" Sarah asked. "I mean, really know, not just the official records." Mike consulted his notes. Born Denver General Hospital, September 15, 1989. Parents are Robert and Margaret Smith. He's a retired accountant. She was a nurse at Presbyterian St. Joseph. 2 older brothers, both clean records. Family attended St. Catherine's Catholic Church until Olivia was about 14, then they stopped going for unknown reasons. He flipped a page. High school records show she was an average student, maybe slightly above. No disciplinary issues, but no real achievements either. Participated in student council her senior year, but quit halfway through for unspecified reasons. College was unremarkable. B average, no clubs or organizations. She did her student teaching at a middle school in Aurora, got good reviews. What about relationships, dating history? That's where it gets interesting, Mike said, settling into the chair across from her. According to friends we interviewed, she's had very few serious relationships. Dated a guy named Trevor Walsh from 2014 to 2017, but he moved to California after they broke up. Said she was emotionally unavailable and seemed to be carrying some kind of burden. We're trying to track him down. Any overlap with 2011? Anyone she was seeing around the time Emma was killed? Not that we can find. Friends describe her as being in a dark period during her early 20s, living alone, working as a substitute teacher, keeping to herself. One college roommate said she went through a phase where she was obsessed with true crime podcasts and murder documentaries. Thought it was just a morbid fascination. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. How many killers had hidden their guilt behind a facade of interest in criminal justice? How many had joined searches for their own victims, attended vigils, and even donated to reward funds? We need to dig deeper into February 2011. Where was she living? What was she doing for work? Who were her friends? And Mike, we need to find out if she had any connection to Emma Rodriguez before that night. The next morning brought a development that would change everything. Sarah was reviewing crime scene photos when her phone rang. The caller ID showed a Denver number she didn't recognize. Detective Martinez. This is Angela Foster. I saw the news about Olivia Smith, and I think I need to tell you something. Angela Foster was 28 years old, a social worker who lived in a neat duplex near the University of Denver. She met Sarah and Mike at a coffee shop downtown, her hands shaking as she wrapped them around her latte cup. Olivia and I were roommates in 2011. Angela began, her voice barely above a whisper. We shared an apartment in Capitol Hill. I knew something was wrong that winter, but I never imagined it could be something like this. Sarah leaned forward. What do you mean something was wrong? She started acting strange in January, moody, paranoid. She would stay out all night sometimes and not tell me where she'd been. And then in February, Angela paused, tears forming in her eyes. The night that girl disappeared, Emma Rodriguez, Olivia came home around 3 in the morning covered in mud. The coffee shop suddenly felt too warm, the normal sounds of conversation and espresso machines seeming to fade into background noise.
"Tell me exactly what you remember," Sarah said carefully. "I couldn't sleep because of my upstairs neighbors. They were having a party. When I heard Olivia's key in the door, I looked at the clock. It was 2:47 a.m. She tried to be quiet, but I could hear her in the bathroom, running water for a long time. In the morning, I found her clothes in the washing machine, jeans and a sweatshirt, but also her sneakers. Who washes their shoes unless they're really dirty?" Mike was taking notes rapidly. "Did you ask her about it?" "I tried to. She said she'd been hiking and fell in the mud. But
That didn't make sense. It was February and there was snow on the ground. And she looked scared, Detective. Really scared. Like she'd seen something terrible. Did her behavior change after that night? Angela nodded vigorously. She became obsessed with the news coverage of Emma's disappearance, not just watching it, but recording it, cutting out newspaper articles. She had this folder full of clippings about the search efforts. I thought maybe she was just really affected by the story, like some people get with tragedy. But looking back, why didn't you come forward before now? The question hung in the air like cigarette smoke. Angela stared into her coffee cup, her shoulders hunched with 12 years of guilt. I was young and scared. Olivia was my friend, and I couldn't believe she would hurt anyone. After they found Emma's body and the investigation continued, I kept waiting for them to arrest someone else, some stranger, some obvious criminal. When months went by with no arrest, I started to doubt what I'd seen. I convinced myself I'd misremembered, that it was just a coincidence. What made you change your mind? Time, Angela said simply. 12 years of knowing something was wrong and not doing anything about it. 12 years of seeing Emma's mother on the news, begging for information. I can't live with it anymore. The interview continued for 2 hours. Angela provided details that only someone who had lived with Olivia could know. The way she started sleeping with her door locked after February 2011. How she would sometimes wake up screaming from nightmares she refused to discuss. The way she threw herself into teaching as if trying to make amends for something. Most damning of all was Angela's account of a conversation they'd had in March 2011, about a month after Emma's body was discovered. I made some casual comment about the case, something like, "I hope they catch whoever did this." And Olivia looked at me with this expression I'll never forget. She said, "Some people deserve what happens to them." When I asked her what she meant, she just walked away. By the time Angela left the coffee shop, Sarah had enough corroboration to feel confident that their case was solid. But she also had new questions that demanded answers. If Olivia had killed Emma Rodriguez, why? What could possibly have motivated a 21-year-old substitute teacher to murder a teenage girl she had never met? The answer came from an unexpected source. Trevor Walsh, Olivia's former boyfriend, returned Sarah's call from his office in San Diego. His voice carried the weight of someone who had been expecting this conversation for years. "I've been following the news. I knew this day would come eventually. Mr. Walsh, I need to ask you about your relationship with Olivia Smith." 3 years of my life I'll never get back, Trevor said bitterly. "I loved her, Detective. I really did. But she was carrying so much baggage, so much guilt about something she would never talk about. It was like being in love with a ghost." "Did she ever mention Emma Rodriguez?" A long pause. "Not by name, but she was obsessed with that case. Had newspaper clippings, printouts from online articles. She would read about the investigation compulsively, especially late at night when she couldn't sleep, which was often."
Did she ever explain her interest in the case? She said she felt guilty that she hadn't done more to help with the search. Said she'd been in the area that night and might have seen something important, but she'd been too drunk to remember clearly. I believed her at first. A lot of people felt guilty about that case. Like maybe if they'd been more aware, more vigilant, they could have prevented it. Sarah's pulse quickened. She said she was in the area the night Emma disappeared? Yeah, but her story kept changing. Sometimes she said she'd been at a party in Lakewood. Other times she claimed she was hiking, even though it was February. Once, when she'd been drinking, she said something about teaching that little bitch a lesson. But when I asked her what she meant, she clammed up and wouldn't talk for 3 days. The pieces were starting to come together, forming a picture that was both clearer and more disturbing than Sarah had imagined. Olivia Smith hadn't killed Emma Rodriguez in a moment of random violence. This had been personal. "Mr. Walsh, did Olivia ever work at a movie theater?" Yeah, briefly, right around the time we met. She got fired after a few months, something about inappropriate behavior with customers. She never wanted to talk about it. The Canyon Vista Cinema, where Emma Rodriguez had worked her final shift, was only 12 miles from the apartment Olivia shared with Angela Foster. If Olivia had worked there around the same time, Sarah's hands were shaking as she hung up the phone. They needed to pull employment records from the theater, interview former managers and coworkers, reconstruct the relationship between killer and victim that had somehow remained hidden for 12 years. But first, she needed to call Rosa Rodriguez. The woman who had waited more than a decade for answers was about to learn that her daughter's killer had been hiding in plain sight all along, teaching children and earning the community's trust while Emma's body lay cold in the ground. The call to Rosa was the hardest conversation Sarah had ever had as a detective. Through tears, Rosa listened as Sarah explained the emerging picture of Olivia Smith's guilt. When Sarah finished, Rosa was quiet for a long moment. "Detective, my Emma was a good girl. She would have helped anyone who needed it. What could she possibly have done to make someone hate her enough to do what was done to her?" It was a question that would haunt the investigation for weeks to come. As more witnesses came forward and more evidence emerged, one truth became increasingly clear. Emma Rodriguez died not because of anything she had done, but because she had encountered someone whose capacity for violence was hidden beneath a carefully constructed mask of normalcy. The most chilling revelation came from security footage that had been overlooked in the original investigation. The Canyon Vista Cinema's parking lot camera had captured a figure approaching Emma's car on the night she disappeared. The footage was grainy and the lighting poor, but enhancement technology available in 2023 revealed details that had been invisible 12 years earlier. The figure was small, female, and moved with purpose toward Emma's vehicle. Most disturbing of all, she appeared to be wearing the red vest that was part of the theater's employee uniform. Olivia Smith had gone hunting that night, and Emma Rodriguez had been her prey.
Did she ever explain her interest in the case? She said she felt guilty that she hadn't done more to help with the search. Said she'd been in the area that night and might have seen something important, but she'd been too drunk to remember clearly. I believed her at first. A lot of people felt guilty about that case. Like maybe if they'd been more aware, more vigilant, they could have prevented it. Sarah's pulse quickened. She said she was in the area the night Emma disappeared? Yeah, but her story kept changing. Sometimes she said she'd been at a party in Lakewood. Other times she claimed she was hiking, even though it was February. Once, when she'd been drinking, she said something about teaching that little bitch a lesson. But when I asked her what she meant, she clammed up and wouldn't talk for 3 days. The pieces were starting to come together, forming a picture that was both clearer and more disturbing than Sarah had imagined. Olivia Smith hadn't killed Emma Rodriguez in a moment of random violence. This had been personal. Mr. Walsh, did Olivia ever work at a movie theater? Yeah, briefly, right around the time we met. She got fired after a few months. Something about inappropriate behavior with customers. She never wanted to talk about it. The Canyon Vista Cinema, where Emma Rodriguez had worked her final shift, was only 12 miles from the apartment Olivia shared with Angela Foster. If Olivia had worked there around the same time, Sarah's hands were shaking as she hung up the phone. They needed to pull employment records from the theater, interview former managers and coworkers, reconstruct the relationship between killer and victim that had somehow remained hidden for 12 years. But first, she needed to call Rosa Rodriguez. The woman who had waited more than a decade for answers was about to learn that her daughter's killer had been hiding in plain sight all along, teaching children and earning the community's trust while Emma's body lay cold in the ground. The call to Rosa was the hardest conversation Sarah had ever had as a detective. Through tears, Rosa listened as Sarah explained the emerging picture of Olivia Smith's guilt. When Sarah finished, Rosa was quiet for a long moment. "Detective, my Emma was a good girl. She would have helped anyone who needed it.
What could she possibly have done to make someone hate her enough to do what was done to her? It was a question that would haunt the investigation for weeks to come. As more witnesses came forward and more evidence emerged, one truth became increasingly clear. Emma Rodriguez had died not because of anything she had done, but because she had encountered someone's capacity for violence was hidden beneath a carefully constructed mask of normalcy. The most chilling revelation came from security footage that had been overlooked in the original investigation. The Canyon Vista Cinema's parking lot camera had captured a figure approaching Emma's car on the night she disappeared. The footage was grainy and the lighting poor, but enhancement technology available in 2023 revealed details that had been invisible 12 years earlier. The figure was small, female, and moved with purpose toward Emma's vehicle. Most disturbing of all, she appeared to be wearing the red vest that was part of the theater's employee uniform. Olivia Smith had gone hunting that night, and Emma Rodriguez had been her prey.
The figure in red moved closer, and the two women appeared to have a brief conversation. Then, in a sequence that lasted less than 30 seconds, but would haunt Sarah's dreams for years to come, the footage showed Emma's posture change from relaxed to alarmed. She took a step backward, one hand raised as if to ward off whatever was being said to her. The red-vested figure moved forward aggressively, and Emma turned to run. She almost made it to her car. The struggle was brief, but vicious. Emma fought back. The defensive wounds on her hands and arms had told that story from the beginning. But she was overpowered, dragged away from the security camera's range into the darkness that would claim her life. District Attorney Patricia Hawkins paused the video and turned to address the packed courtroom. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, what you have just witnessed is the last known footage of Emma Rodriguez alive. The person in the red vest, as we will prove beyond reasonable doubt, is the defendant, Olivia Smith." Olivia sat at the defense table in a conservative blue dress, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her expression giving away nothing. She might have been attending a faculty meeting rather than her own murder trial. Only the slight tension around her eyes suggested the tremendous effort it took to maintain such composure while the evidence of her crime played out for the world to see. The prosecution's case had been building for 6 months, since Olivia's arrest. What had started with a single DNA match had evolved into a comprehensive portrait of premeditation and carefully concealed malice. The employment records from Canyon Vista Cinema had revealed the connection that investigators had missed in 2011. Olivia Smith had worked at the theater from September 2010 through January 2011. Fired 3 weeks before Emma's murder for what the manager diplomatically called interpersonal conflicts with younger employees. Jennifer Walsh, the former assistant manager, had been the prosecution's star witness the previous day. Her testimony painted a picture of escalating workplace tension that provided the missing motive for Emma's murder. Olivia had problems with several of the teenage employees, Jennifer had testified, her voice steady despite the weight of 12 years of guilt. She seemed to resent their energy, their optimism. She made comments about how they didn't understand how hard life could be, how they needed to be brought down to earth. Did she have specific issues with Emma Rodriguez? Emma was everything Olivia wasn't, Jennifer had said, her eyes finding Rosa Rodriguez in the gallery. Popular, confident, loved by customers and co-workers alike. Emma had been nominated for Employee of the Month 3 times in the 6 months she worked there. She was planning for college, talking about her dreams constantly. I think it drove Olivia crazy. The breaking point, according to Jennifer's testimony, had come in mid-January, when Emma was promoted to shift supervisor, a position Olivia had applied for and been rejected for. The promotion came with a 50-cent per hour raise and the authority to make scheduling decisions.
Olivia felt she deserved the promotion because she was older and more mature, Jennifer had explained. When I told her we were giving it to Emma, she completely lost it. Started screaming about how unfair it was, how teenagers didn't deserve good things just handed to them. I had to fire her on the spot. According to witness statements, Olivia had been escorted from the building by security after threatening to teach that little princess a lesson she'll never forget. At the time, it had seemed like the empty threat of a disgruntled employee. 12 years later, it read like a confession. Dr. Amanda Chen, the forensic psychologist called by the prosecution, had spent hours analyzing Olivia's psychological profile. Her testimony provided chilling insight into the mind of someone who could plan and execute such a calculated murder.
The defendant exhibits classic signs of narcissistic personality disorder with antisocial features, Dr. Chen had explained to the jury. She presents a carefully constructed public persona designed to earn admiration and trust, while harboring deep resentment toward those she perceives as more fortunate or successful. In your opinion, Dr. Chen, would someone with this psychological profile be capable of maintaining a normal life after committing murder? Absolutely. In fact, the need to maintain their public image would be even stronger after such an act. The defendant's choice to become an elementary school teacher is particularly telling. It's a profession that provides constant validation and positions her as a nurturing, trustworthy figure, the perfect cover for someone hiding a terrible secret. The most devastating testimony had come from Angela Foster, Olivia's former roommate. Her account of that February night had provided the timeline that connected Olivia to Emma's disappearance. But it was her description of Olivia's behavior in the days and weeks afterward that had truly shaken the courtroom. She became obsessed with the search efforts, Angela had testified, her voice breaking as she described watching her former friend manipulate the community's grief. She volunteered for search parties, attended vigils, even donated money to the reward fund. I thought she was just really affected by the tragedy, like a lot of people were. Now I realize she was watching, making sure the investigation didn't get too close to the truth. The defense attorney, Robert Castellanos, had tried to poke holes in the prosecution's narrative during cross-examination. He argued that the DNA evidence could have been transferred innocently, that the workplace conflict was insufficient motive for murder, that 12 years of exemplary service as a teacher proved his client's character. But each defense argument crumbled under the weight of accumulating evidence. The DNA found on Emma's clothing wasn't touch DNA that could be explained away. It was blood DNA, found in a location consistent with close physical contact during a violent struggle. The workplace conflict wasn't a minor disagreement, but a pattern of escalating resentment that had culminated in termination and threats. And Olivia's years as a teacher, rather than proving her innocence, demonstrated her ability to maintain a deceptive facade while harboring deadly impulses. The courtroom gasped when Detective Sarah Martinez took the stand to describe the items found during the search of Olivia's current apartment. Hidden in a storage box in her bedroom closet, investigators had discovered what they were calling her trophy collection: newspaper clippings about Emma's case, printouts of online articles about the investigation, and most disturbing of all, Emma's missing earrings. The earrings were described in the missing person report, but never found at the crime scene. They were distinctive, small silver dolphins that Emma had received as a gift for her 16th birthday. Her mother confirmed the identification. Rosa Rodriguez had broken down sobbing when the earrings were presented as evidence. Those small silver dolphins, now tarnished with age, had been Emma's favorite jewelry. Rosa had given them to her daughter just 2 months before her death, an early birthday present that Emma had worn constantly until the night she died. The fact that Olivia had kept them for 12 years spoke to a level of cold calculation that chilled everyone in the courtroom. This wasn't a crime of passion or a moment of temporary insanity. This was the act of someone who had killed deliberately and taken souvenirs to remember the experience.
Dr. Patricia Williams, the forensic pathologist who had performed Emma's autopsy, provided the final piece of the prosecution's case. Her testimony about the nature of Emma's injuries painted a picture of sustained, deliberate violence that contradicted any possibility of accident or self-defense. The victim sustained 17 separate blunt force injuries to her head and upper body, Dr. Williams testified, her clinical language unable to soften the horror of what she was describing. The pattern of injuries suggests a prolonged attack lasting several minutes. Based on the location and severity of the wounds, the victim would have been conscious for at least part of the assault. The courtroom was silent as Dr. Williams explained how Emma died, not quickly or mercifully, but slowly, aware of what was happening to her in those final moments. The thought of that brave 16-year-old girl fighting for her life in a dark ravine while her killer methodically bludgeoned her to death was almost too terrible to comprehend. But perhaps the most damning evidence came not from forensic analysis or witness testimony, but from Olivia herself. During her interrogation following her arrest, she had maintained her innocence for hours. But when presented with the DNA evidence and Angela Foster's account of that February night, something had shifted in her demeanor. The interrogation video played on the courtroom monitor showed Olivia's carefully maintained composure finally cracking. For 12 years, she had lived with the secret of what she had done. For 12 years, she had watched Emma's family suffer while she built a new life on the foundation of her victim's grave. And for 12 years, she had managed to convince herself that she was the victim, that Emma had somehow deserved what happened to her. She thought she was better than everyone else, Olivia had said during the interrogation, her voice flat and emotionless. Walking around like she owned the world, like everything would just be handed to her because she was young and pretty and popular. Someone needed to show her that life isn't fair. So you decided to teach her that lesson? A long pause. Then, I didn't plan for it to go so far. I just wanted to scare her, to take her down a peg. But she fought back, and she was stronger than I expected. Things got out of hand. What happened in the ravine, Olivia? Another long pause, this time longer. When Olivia spoke again, her voice carried a chilling lack of remorse. She kept saying she was sorry, that she didn't understand what she'd done wrong. But it was too late for sorry. She needed to learn that actions have consequences. The jury had listened to this confession in horrified silence. Here was a woman who had beaten a teenager to death, not in a moment of rage or panic, but as a calculated lesson in what she perceived as cosmic justice. Emma Rodriguez had died not because of anything she had done, but because she represented everything Olivia Smith felt she had been denied. When the interrogation video ended, the prosecution rested its case. Robert Castellanos stood to present his defense, but everyone in the courtroom knew it was a futile gesture. The evidence was overwhelming, the confession damning, and the portrait of premeditated murder too complete to be explained away. The defense's strategy focused on mental health, arguing that Olivia's actions were the result of undiagnosed psychological disorders that diminished her capacity for rational thought. Expert witnesses testified about the effects of personality disorders on decision-making, about the role of childhood trauma in shaping adult behavior, about the possibility that Olivia had been in a dissociative state during the murder. But the prosecution's rebuttal was devastating. If Olivia had been mentally incapacitated, how had she managed to avoid detection for 12 years? How had she maintained such a successful career as a teacher while hiding such a dark secret? The evidence suggested not mental illness, but something far more unsettling. A person of above-average intelligence who had committed murder out of jealousy and entitlement, then spent over a decade crafting a public persona designed to deflect suspicion.
As the trial neared its conclusion, Sarah found herself thinking about all the lives that had been touched by Olivia's crime. Emma Rodriguez, whose bright future had been snuffed out before it truly began. Rosa Rodriguez, who had spent 12 years in limbo, unable to grieve properly without answers about her daughter's death. The students who had loved and trusted Olivia, now forced to reconcile their memories with the reality of who she truly was. And there were others, too. The volunteers who had searched for Emma in the freezing Colorado wilderness while her killer watched from the sidelines. The investigators who had followed false leads for years while the real perpetrator lived less than an hour away. The community members who had welcomed Olivia into their schools and homes, never suspecting that they were breaking bread with a murderer. The ripple effects of that February night in 2011 had spread far beyond the ravine where Emma died, touching every life they encountered with tragedy and betrayal. Some wounds, Sarah knew, would never fully heal. When closing arguments began, District Attorney Patricia Hawkins stood before the jury and spoke not just about justice for Emma Rodriguez, but about the nature of evil itself.
Ladies and gentlemen, over the past 3 weeks, you have heard testimony about DNA evidence, workplace conflicts, and psychological profiles. But at its heart, this case is about something much simpler and much more terrifying. It's about the fact that evil can hide behind the most ordinary faces, that the people we trust most can harbor the darkest secrets. She gestured toward Olivia, who sat motionless at the defense table. The defendant is not mentally ill. She is not a victim of circumstances beyond her control. She is a cold-blooded killer who murdered an innocent girl out of jealousy and spite, then spent 12 years building a life on the foundation of that crime. Emma Rodriguez died because she had the audacity to be young, beautiful, and full of hope. She died because someone couldn't bear to see her succeed. And for 12 years, her killer taught children, earned their trust, and accepted their love while Emma's family lived in agony. Patricia paused, letting the weight of those words settle over the courtroom. Justice delayed is not justice denied. Emma Rodriguez deserves accountability for the crime that took her life. Her family deserves answers after 12 years of uncertainty. And this community deserves to know that the woman they trusted with their children was capable of the most heinous betrayal imaginable. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before reaching their verdict. When the foreman stood to read the decision, the courtroom was so quiet that Sarah could hear her own heartbeat. We, the jury, find the defendant, Olivia Smith, guilty of murder in the first degree. Rosa Rodriguez collapsed into her sister's arms, 12 years of grief and uncertainty finally finding release in tears of relief and vindication. Sarah felt her own eyes filling as she watched the woman who had become like a second mother to her finally receive the justice she had waited so long to see. Olivia Smith showed no emotion as the verdict was read. She had spent so many years hiding her true feelings that perhaps she no longer remembered how to access them. As the bailiff led her away in handcuffs, she looked back once at the gallery where her own parents sat in shocked silence, their faces reflecting the same disbelief that had characterized the community's reaction to her arrest. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for the following month, but everyone knew what the outcome would be. Colorado law mandated life in prison without the possibility of parole for first-degree murder. Olivia Smith would spend the rest of her natural life behind bars, just as Emma Rodriguez would spend eternity in the ground. Outside the courthouse, Rosa Rodriguez spoke to the assembled media with a dignity that had sustained her through 12 years of uncertainty. "Today, justice was finally served for my Emma," she said, her voice strong despite the tears streaming down her face. "No mother should have to wait 12 years to see her child's killer brought to justice, but today that wait is over." She paused, looking directly into the cameras that would carry her words across the state and beyond. "I want to thank Detective Sarah Martinez and everyone who never gave up on Emma's case. And I want to say to other families who are still waiting for answers, don't give up hope. The truth has a way of coming to light, no matter how long it takes."
As Sarah watched Rosa field questions from reporters, she felt a complex mixture of satisfaction and sorrow. Justice had been served, but it couldn't bring Emma back. It couldn't restore the innocence that had been shattered in a community that trusted a killer with their children. It couldn't erase 12 years of pain and uncertainty. But it was something. After all this time, it was finally something. The sentencing hearing took place on a gray October morning, 6 months after the verdict that had finally brought closure to one of Colorado's most haunting cold cases. The same courtroom that had witnessed Olivia Smith's conviction now filled with a different energy, not the tense anticipation of a trial, but the solemn finality of judgment. Judge Margaret Thornton had presided over hundreds of criminal cases during her 23 years on the bench, but few had ever affected her as deeply as the murder of Emma Rodriguez. As she prepared to deliver Olivia's sentence, she reflected on the unique tragedy of a crime that had stolen not just one life, but had poisoned an entire community's sense of security.
Olivia sat at the defense table in the same blue dress she had worn throughout the trial, her posture erect and her expression unchanged. Even now, facing the prospect of spending the rest of her life in prison, she maintained the careful composure that had allowed her to hide in plain sight for 12 years. Robert Castellanos sat beside her, having exhausted every legal avenue in a case where the evidence left no room for doubt. Rosa Rodriguez occupied her familiar seat in the front row of the gallery, flanked by family members whose faces bore the weight of over a decade of grief. She had aged visibly during the months of legal proceedings, but there was a strength in her bearing that spoke of a woman finally approaching the end of a journey that had defined most of her adult life. The impact statements began with Rosa herself, who walked slowly to the podium and faced the woman who had murdered her daughter. For a moment, the two women looked at each other across the courtroom, the mother who had never stopped seeking justice, and the killer who had spent 12 years pretending to care about other people's children while Rosa's own child lay in the ground. Emma would have been 28 years old today, Rosa began, her voice steady but thick with emotion. She would have graduated from college, probably with a degree in marine biology like she always dreamed. She might have been married, might have given me grandchildren. She might have been working to protect the oceans she loves so much. Rosa's hands gripped the edges of the podium as she continued. Instead, she's been in the ground for 12 years because someone couldn't stand to see her succeed, because someone decided that my beautiful, innocent daughter deserved to die for the crime of being young and happy. She turned slightly to look directly at Olivia. You stole everything from her. Her future, her dreams, her chance to make the world a better place. But you also stole from me. You stole 12 years of my life. Years I spent wondering and hoping and praying for answers. You made me doubt my faith, my sanity, my ability to keep going. The courtroom was silent except for the soft sounds of people crying. Even some of the court officers, who had seen every kind of tragedy imaginable, wiped away tears as Rosa continued. But most of all, you stole from this community. For 12 years, you taught children while their parents had no idea they were sending their babies to learn from a killer. You accepted their trust, their love, their gratitude, all while knowing what you had done to another mother's child. Rosa's voice grew stronger, powered by righteous anger that had been building for over a decade. I hope you spend every day of the rest of your life remembering Emma's face. I hope you never forget the sound of her voice when she begged you to stop. And I hope that somewhere in whatever passes for your soul, you understand the magnitude of what you destroyed that night. She returned to her seat without looking at Olivia again, having said everything she needed to say to the woman who had haunted her dreams for 12 years. The next impact statement came from Dr. James Patterson, the principal at Oakwood Elementary, where Olivia had taught for 5 years before her arrest. His words carried the weight of a community grappling with the betrayal of their most fundamental trust.
As educators, we are entrusted with society's most precious gift, their children. Parents send their 5 and 6 and 7-year-olds to us believing that we will keep them safe, that we will nurture their growth, that we will be positive role models in their young lives. He paused, gathering himself before continuing. Olivia Smith violated that trust in the most unimaginable way. She stood in front of children every day, teaching them about kindness and honesty and treating others with respect, all while hiding the fact that she had beaten a teenager to death. The hypocrisy is so profound that it defies comprehension. Dr. Patterson described the trauma that Olivia's arrest had inflicted on the school community. Children who couldn't understand why their beloved teacher had been taken away. Parents who questioned their ability to judge character. Faculty members who wondered if they had missed warning signs that might have protected their students. We've had to bring in counselors to help our children process this betrayal. We've had to reassure parents that thorough background checks and psychological evaluations are part of our hiring process, even though those safeguards failed to detect what Miss Smith truly was. The damage to our school community will take years to heal.
Several of Olivia's former students had wanted to provide impact statements, but Judge Thornton had ruled that their young age made such testimony inappropriate. Instead, their parents spoke on their behalf, describing children who had nightmares about their teacher, who no longer trusted adults as readily as they once had, who had been forced to confront the existence of evil far too early in their innocent lives. Angela Foster, Olivia's former roommate who had provided crucial testimony during the trial, also addressed the court. Her statement carried the guilt of someone who felt she could have prevented tragedy if she had acted on her suspicions 12 years earlier. "I live every day knowing that I had information that could have brought Emma Rodriguez's killer to justice," Angela said, tears streaming down her face. "I saw Olivia come home covered in mud that night. I saw her wash her clothes and shoes. I saw her become obsessed with the case, and I said nothing." She described the burden of carrying that knowledge for over a decade, the way it had affected her relationships and her ability to trust her own judgment. "I convinced myself that I was wrong, that my friend couldn't possibly be capable of murder. I was young and scared, and I chose the cowardly path of silence." Angela's voice grew stronger as she continued. "But I want other people to learn from my mistake. If you see something suspicious, if your instincts tell you something is wrong, don't ignore those feelings. Don't let loyalty or fear or uncertainty stop you from speaking up, because somewhere there's a family waiting for answers, and your silence might be the only thing standing between them and justice." The final impact statement came from Detective Sarah Martinez, whose 12-year pursuit of Emma's killer had finally culminated in this moment. As the lead investigator on the case, she had been given permission to address the court about the broader impact of Olivia's crime on the law enforcement community and the pursuit of justice. "Your Honor, in my 15 years as a detective, I have never encountered a case that has affected me as profoundly as the murder of Emma Rodriguez," Sarah began. "This crime didn't just take the life of an innocent young woman, it challenged everything I believed about justice, about truth, and about the ability of evil to hide behind ordinary faces." She described the toll that the investigation had taken on everyone involved, the sleepless nights, the false leads that raised and dashed hopes, the weight of responsibility to a family that deserved answers they might never receive. "For 12 years, we carried the burden of an unsolved case. We questioned our abilities, our dedication, our worthiness to wear the badge. We looked at Emma's photograph every day and wondered if we were failing her, if we were letting her killer walk free because we weren't smart enough or persistent enough to find the truth." But Sarah also spoke about the lessons learned from the case, the ways it had changed investigative procedures, and the importance of never giving up on seeking justice for victims.
Emma Rodriguez deserved better than to become a cold case file gathering dust on a shelf. She deserved investigators who would never stop looking, who would follow every lead no matter how small, who would use every tool available to bring her killer to justice. And in the end, that persistence paid off. She concluded by addressing Olivia directly. "You thought you were clever enough to get away with murder. You thought you could hide behind a mask of respectability while Emma's family suffered. You were wrong. The truth has a way of surfacing no matter how deep you try to bury it, and today, that truth has caught up with you." When the impact statements concluded, Judge Thornton called for a brief recess before delivering the sentence. During the break, Sarah found herself standing outside the courthouse, breathing in the crisp October air and thinking about the journey that had brought them to this point. 12 years. 12 years of following leads that went nowhere, of interviewing witnesses who had nothing useful to say, of staring at evidence that seemed to point in every direction except toward the truth. 12 years of watching Rosa Rodriguez age under the weight of uncertainty, of seeing a community's faith in justice slowly erode as Emma's case grew colder with each passing month. The afternoon sun broke through the October clouds as they emerged from the building, casting long shadows across the courthouse steps, where Rosa had waited so many times for updates that never seemed to bring her closer to the answers she sought. Today, finally, the waiting was over. But the healing, for Rosa, for the community, for everyone touched by Emma's murder, was just beginning. The brutal murder of 16-year-old Emma Rodriguez on February 20th, 2011, in Cedar Ridge, Colorado, would become one of the most significant cold cases in American criminal justice history. Emma, a bright teenager who dreamed of becoming a marine biologist, was beaten to death by Olivia Smith, a respected elementary school teacher who had harbored dark secrets behind her carefully crafted public persona. What made this case particularly shocking was not just the violence of the crime, but the extraordinary deception that followed. For 12 years after Emma's murder, Olivia Smith continued to live freely in the same community, teaching third grade at Oakwood Elementary School and earning the love and trust of hundreds of children and their families. She attended faculty meetings, parent-teacher conferences, and school events, all while carrying the secret that she had brutally ended a young woman's life out of jealousy and spite. The murder itself was born from a twisted sense of envy. Emma Rodriguez represented everything that Olivia felt had been denied to her: youth, beauty, hope, and unlimited potential. Working at the Canyon Vista Cinema, where Emma was employed, Olivia became obsessed with the teenager's radiant personality and bright future. On that February night in 2011, this obsession turned deadly when Olivia followed Emma to a secreted area and beat her to death with a blunt object. For over a decade, Emma's family lived with the agony of an unsolved murder. Her mother, Rosa Rodriguez, refused to let her daughter's case fade into obscurity, maintaining constant pressure on law enforcement and advocating for continued investigation. Detective Sarah Martinez, who had initially worked the case as a young officer, never stopped believing that advances in forensic science would eventually provide the breakthrough needed to identify Emma's killer. That breakthrough came in the form of advanced DNA analysis. Silver DNA evidence, genetic material that had degraded significantly over time, was extracted from Emma's clothing using cutting-edge technology that hadn't been available when the crime was first investigated. This scientific advancement would prove to be the key that unlocked a case that had seemed impossible to solve. The DNA evidence pointed directly to Olivia Smith, stunning the Cedar Ridge community and revealing that a killer had been hiding in plain sight for 12 years. The revelation was particularly traumatic for Olivia's students and their families, who had trusted their children to someone capable of such calculated violence. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the case was Olivia's ability to maintain her false persona for so long. Prison psychiatrist Dr. Rebecca Martinez documented a woman who showed no genuine remorse for her crime, viewing Emma's murder as a mistake rather than a deliberate act of violence. Even after decades of incarceration, Olivia continued to see herself as the victim, unable to acknowledge the humanity of the teenager she had killed. This psychological profile revealed the chilling nature of hidden violence, how individuals can compartmentalize their capacity for evil while presenting themselves as pillars of the community. Olivia's case became a landmark study in criminal psychology, demonstrating how killers can use positions of trust and authority to mask their true nature. The impact on her former students was profound and lasting. Marcus Johnson, who had been one of Olivia's favorite third-grade students, grew up to become a criminal psychologist driven by the need to understand how someone could simultaneously nurture and destroy. His experience highlighted the long-term psychological damage that such betrayals can inflict on children and communities. The revelation of Olivia's guilt forced the Cedar Ridge community to grapple with the profound betrayal of trust. Oakwood Elementary underwent significant changes, implementing new screening procedures and psychological evaluations for staff members. The classroom where Olivia had taught was completely renovated, symbolically replacing tainted memories with new hope for healing. Principal Catterson retired, unable to shake his feelings of responsibility for failing to detect the danger in their midst. His replacement implemented comprehensive reforms designed to protect students and rebuild community confidence in the educational system. The broader community established memorial traditions to honor Emma's memory while processing their collective trauma. Annual candlelight vigils on the anniversary of Emma's murder became moments of remembrance and recommitment to protecting young people. A memorial garden at the elementary school taught children about life and growth while honoring victims of violence. From her grief, Rosa Rodriguez created something beautiful and powerful. Emma's Light Foundation became a major force in victim advocacy, helping to solve dozens of cold cases and providing support to hundreds of families navigating the criminal justice system. The foundation's work demonstrated how personal tragedy could be transformed into a source of hope and justice for others. The scholarship fund established in Emma's name supported young women pursuing careers in marine biology, allowing Emma's dreams to live on through others. Over 35 years, more than 200 women received Emma Rodriguez Memorial Scholarships, going on to make significant contributions to ocean science and environmental protection. Rosa's advocacy also led to improvements in cold case investigation techniques and victim support services. Her persistence in keeping Emma's case alive helped establish protocols for maintaining evidence and applying new technologies to old crimes. The foundation's work created a model for how families could channel their grief into meaningful action for justice. The Emma Rodriguez case became a landmark in forensic science, particularly in the development of techniques for analyzing degraded DNA evidence. The silver DNA technology used to solve the case led to breakthroughs in hundreds of other investigations, proving that evidence once considered too damaged to analyze could still yield crucial information. Dr. Patricia Williams, the forensic pathologist who testified about Emma's injuries, built her career partly on recognition from this case, developing new methods for analyzing blunt force trauma that helped solve other difficult murders. The case became required study material in forensic science programs, demonstrating the importance of preserving evidence and never giving up on seemingly impossible cases. The legal precedents established through Emma's case influenced cold case investigations nationwide. Law enforcement agencies developed new protocols for evidence preservation and analysis, while victim advocacy programs adopted many of the support services pioneered by Emma's Light Foundation. Angela Foster, Olivia's former roommate, who had suspected something was wrong but remained silent for years, became a victim's advocate after testifying in the trial. Her experience demonstrated the critical importance of speaking up when something seems wrong, and her work led to breakthroughs in several other cold cases. Her book about living with the killer became required reading in criminal justice programs.
The case also influenced educational policies and practices.
Dr. James Patterson's book about recognizing hidden danger in schools became a standard reference for administrators dealing with personnel screening. The case highlighted the limitations of background checks and reference letters, leading to more comprehensive evaluation procedures for educators and caregivers. Marcus Johnson's research into the pedagogy of deception examined how killers use teaching positions as cover, contributing to better understanding of how predators infiltrate trusted institutions. His work helped develop new training programs for recognizing warning signs of hidden violence. As Olivia Smith aged in prison, spending more of her life incarcerated than free, she remained fundamentally unchanged. Prison records showed a woman who had never developed genuine remorse or insight into her crime, continuing to view herself as a victim of circumstances. Her attempted autobiography revealed the same self-serving narrative she had maintained for decades, demonstrating the psychological damage that prevented any real rehabilitation. Meanwhile, Emma's legacy continued to grow. The techniques developed to solve her case helped bring closure to countless other families, while the foundation established in her name provided ongoing support for victims and their loved ones. Her story became a teaching tool in law enforcement training, reminding new investigators never to give up on victims who deserve justice. Rosa Rodriguez lived to see the full flowering of her daughter's legacy before passing away at age 82. Her funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives had been touched by Emma's story, families who had found closure, investigators who had been inspired, and young scientists who had benefited from Emma's scholarships. 36 years after Emma Rodriguez's murder, her story continues to resonate as a testament to the power of persistence, community support, and the enduring belief that truth will eventually surface. The case demonstrated that justice, however delayed, is always worth pursuing, and that the dead can continue to serve the living through the changes their stories inspire. The small cemetery in Cedar Ridge where Emma rests continues to receive flowers from strangers touched by her story. Her weathered headstone bears an inscription that remains as true today as when it was first carved: "Forever young, forever loved, forever missed." But time has revealed another truth, that sometimes a single tragedy can prevent countless others, and that the impact of one young life can extend far beyond the years it was lived. The Emma Rodriguez case stands as proof that behind every cold case is a real person who deserved better, and that the pursuit of justice, no matter how long it takes, honors not only the victims, but the very foundations of civilized society. Through the pain of loss came the power to heal others, and through the darkness of one person's evil came the light of countless acts of courage, compassion, and commitment to truth. In the lights of Cedar Ridge that twinkle like stars against the Colorado night, Emma Rodriguez's presence can still be felt, and the case is solved using techniques developed through her investigation, and the families helped by the foundation bearing her name, and in the young scientists studying the oceans she dreamed of protecting. Her murder was meant to silence her forever, but instead it gave her a voice that continues to speak for justice, hope, and the unbreakable bonds between the living and the dead. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work, so if you're enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel.